Aloha, thank you for being here. So happy to have you here and joining us. Grateful to be doing this Facebook Live today. And as a doctor who specializes in children's health, I have talked with hundreds of parents about getting nutritious foods into their kids. I know that parents really want to feed their children healthier food, but it can be a difficult challenge to figure out how. Pediatricians will often tell parents to feed their child healthy food, but they typically don't explain how to do it. And therefore, if a child is a picky eater or has other eating issues, then it can be very challenging for them to be able to address that. Often pediatricians don't have the time or the training to help educate parents on addressing those specific challenges. As a naturopathic doctor, I received extensive nutrition education in medical school, 155 hours of nutrition courses compared with about 19.6 hours of nutrition training in conventional medical schools. I also have a 5-year-old and a soon-to-be 2-year-old, so I'm very familiar with the challenges of getting kids to eat their vegetables. Again, I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm Dr. Taketa-Wong. Like medical doctors, I attended a 4-year medical school and was trained as a primary care physician. I order lab tests, write prescriptions, and do school physicals, the same as any other doctor. But with naturopathic medicine, there is much more because we're taught how to use food and natural remedies to build health from the inside. In addition to that, I'm also a licensed acupuncturist, trained in Chinese medicine. My goal was to educate myself as widely as possible because my passion is to help people not only get healthy, but to stay healthy. I love caring for my patients and believe strongly in working with them as partners in their health and well-being. That's why my office visits are a full hour. 3 pillars form the foundation of my practice. They are to heal, to educate, and to empower. Today's event is a perfect example of those pillars, as it is my intention to both educate and empower our viewers. What I'm going to say next is very important. Many parents aren't told that nutrient deficiencies can actually contribute to picky eating. It's something that can turn into a downward spiral. If children are picky eaters and they have nutrient deficiencies that are contributing to the picky eating, they can become even more picky eaters and even more so don't get the nutrients that they need. And that in turn can contribute further to the picky eating, and it becomes even more challenging to get nutritious food into them. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. If we test the child and their nutrient deficiency is, for example, zinc or magnesium or other nutrient deficiencies, we can give them supplements that can help correct the deficiency and thereby help with the picky eating, stopping that downward spiral. There are other signs of zinc deficiency. Now, you have to keep in mind that not all of these may be present in every child that has a zinc deficiency. But if your child does have some of these symptoms, that's a reason even more so to get them tested for a zinc deficiency. Also important to keep in mind is that oftentimes when conventional doctors, if they order a zinc test, which most of the time they rarely will order nutrients to be tested, because often they just aren't aware usually of how some of those nutrient deficiencies can manifest in clinical practice and in behavior, for example, like with picky eating. But one thing, as I mentioned, that is important to keep in mind is that even if they test for these nutrient deficiencies, there is the normal reference range and there's the optimal range. And what I'm typically looking at for most of the children that I'm working with is I'm really looking for the optimal levels of zinc or magnesium or copper or other kinds of things. And you may have a conventional doctor that might check your child, and if it's in the conventional normal reference range, they might say, okay, your child's fine. However, If their levels are less than optimal, they may still manifest with some of these symptoms. So that is important to keep in mind, that it's really important to have a physician who's trained in terms of the optimal ranges for these nutrients, and not just, oh, well, it's within the conventional normal reference range, because we really want our children to have optimal levels of these nutrients to be able to help them. So if zinc is less than the optimal range, then what are some of the things that may manifest? Well, I mentioned picky eating is one manifestation, one potential manifestation. But zinc also plays a number of other important roles. Zinc is important in our immune system. And so if there's a zinc deficiency, then people could be getting frequent infections. For example, if they're getting sick all the time, or they get a cold or some other illness, and they're sick for a longer than normal period of time, or they get better and then right after that they just start getting sick again. That's not normal. And so we really need to look at that, and that can be a sign of a zinc deficiency. Zinc is also important in our skin, the health of our skin. So for example, if there are skin rashes like acne or eczema or other kinds of chronic skin rashes, especially if there's not a clear explanation for them, that may be related to a zinc deficiency. We could also see issues where if you get a cut, you may be having trouble healing. It takes a really long time for that wound to heal. That could also be a sign of a zinc deficiency. There may also be sensory issues. So if you have a child with autism, you are probably familiar with sensory issues. If not, you may be wondering, what is that? What is a sensory issue? So sensory issues are when you have, for example, sounds or sights or smells where the person can be abnormally oversensitive or undersensitive to those things. So for example, loud noises may really bother a child with sensory issues, much more so than the average child. Or they may be extremely sensitive to touch on their head or their hands, or they may be having issues with, they may have a lower than normal sensitivity to touch or to certain kinds of things. For example, I've had some parents say their child fell down and hit their head, and they got up and they reacted like it was nothing. I've had some parents say that their child actually stepped on thorns and their foot was bleeding, and they didn't even react at all. So those are some signs of some sensory issues. There are other things that can be contributing to picky eating. So refusing to eat vegetables can be a sign of a magnesium deficiency. Also, if the child has muscle cramps or headaches, if they tend to be constipated, if they're hyperactive, if they have difficulty sleeping, or if they have anxiety, all of those things are other signs of a potential magnesium deficiency. So I'm going to say those again: muscle cramps, headaches, constipation, hyperactivity, difficulty sleeping, anxiety. There are many other potential symptoms of magnesium deficiency, and someone doesn't have to have all of those things. But if they do, that is definitely more of a reason to test for magnesium deficiency. So again, checking for those nutrient deficiencies and correcting them can sometimes be a very helpful key in terms of treating the picky eating. We're going to cover a lot more ground today, and I'm going to be also talking about why processed and packaged foods are so harmful. So a lot of our processed foods, particularly things like fast foods, can have a lot of additives, which can be actually quite harmful or problematic. I've seen many children with ADHD or autism where when they get certain additives in foods, for example, dyes, that can cause a problem. I've seen children that have behavior issues, have more difficulty with focus and attention, or more impulsivity, or things like that when they get a lot of fast foods or food with a lot of dyes or preservatives or things like that. Also, most fast foods in general aren't that healthy for us. So, a lot of them are fried foods or things like that, which are not the healthiest. And what about fruit juice? we've been sold on the idea that it's healthier than soda, and so many parents understandably include juice packs with their children's lunches. Unfortunately, the amount of sugar in fruit juice can be almost the same amount as in soda. And I do agree that juice in general is a better alternative than soda. However, I don't agree with the idea that juice is necessarily healthy. I will often recommend juice as a way to get supplements into children if they won't take it other ways, or certain nutrients. However, I don't think that children should always be drinking juice all the time, on a daily basis. And this is essentially because, for example, like with apple juice, you're essentially eating a dozen apples without the fiber and the other nutrients if you're drinking a cup of apple juice. The juice contains a high amount of natural sugar, but the body treats it the same as table sugar when it's that concentrated. So that can be a problem in terms of drinking excessive amounts of juice. And so if your child is really addicted to soda or even juice, what can you do? So water with, say, only a bit of fruit juice or no sugar or artificial sweeteners aren't bad. So there are some flavored waters that have a bit of fruit juice with, to use as a flavor. So sometimes that can be helpful. At home, you can also use a small amount of fruit juice and add seltzer to make a fizzy drink. If your child really likes soda, then you can try to transition them off that way. I generally recommend trying to avoid bottled water, just because the plastic in the plastic bottles does have toxins, and those toxins have been found to leach into the water and get into our bloodstream and our internal organs. Some of those toxins can include things like BPA or bisphenol A. There are also phthalates and other kinds of toxins that are harmful in plastic. And of course, the bottles themselves are a big environmental plastic crisis. One thing that I wanted to mention is that as we go along, if you have a health condition that you want to talk with me about, please call our office and schedule a free phone consultation. There's no charge because I don't take new patients without reviewing their situation first. We discuss your health concerns and come up with a plan that will help you the most. To schedule a free consultation, just call or text the office and click on the link, or you can click on the link in the post, either on Facebook or on YouTube. And all of our contact information is on our Facebook page. So getting back to picky eating, we talked about some of the processed and packaged foods and why they can be harmful. Now, I'm going to get to the thing which most parents are always dealing with, which is vegetables. Do your kids love to eat vegetables? I know many of you will be rolling your eyes, but some kids actually do like them. But for those who don't, here are some tips that can be helpful in terms of helping with that picky eating and finding ways to get vegetables into your children. One of the ways is that you can puree vegetables and mix them into other foods. There's an excellent site called the Sneaky Chef, and it's called thesneakychef.com. I don't have any financial connections with them, but I find it very helpful. There's a lot of recipes that she has for free on her website. She also has entire cookbooks of purees, different kinds of vegetable purees that she has found mix in very well with different kinds of foods. So if your child, for example, will eat spaghetti sauce, you can actually do quite a bit of vegetable purees that can mix in quite easily into spaghetti sauce. So I have pureed and cooked greens. I have cooked pumpkin, cauliflower that I cooked and pureed, and you can mix small amounts into spaghetti sauce without it really affecting the taste too much. So that's something that can be helpful. She also has a number of other kinds of vegetable purees. so cauliflower and pumpkin, that, for example, you could mix into muffins that you can make, or other kinds of things. So you can look at that. That can be very helpful. One tip that I often will recommend to help with making the preparation faster is I will have parents puree vegetables, and then you can pour it into an ice cube tray. And I get stainless steel ice cube trays off of Amazon, just because a lot of the plastic ones, again, will leach some toxins into the food. So I usually use stainless steel ice cube trays off of Amazon. I pour these vegetable purees into them. And then what you can do is you can just pop out a cube here and there, and then you could throw it into soup or stew or a smoothie or spaghetti sauce or other kinds of things, stir fry that you're making. And that's a fairly easy way to get more vegetables into your child. If you can prepare vegetables in a different way than you usually do, sometimes those texture differences can make a difference for a child. And I see many children with autism where texture is a really big issue. And so some of them, for example, will never eat mushy foods. But you could, for example, they will eat things that are crunchy, for example. So you could prepare vegetable chips. You can make dehydrated vegetables, or make them at home to make the vegetable crunchy. You can also try different kinds of textures. So if your child likes certain textures, some children actually like, mushy food, so purees or smoothies, things like that. Some children just like them cut a different way if it looks different. If, for example, if instead of just cutting them regular, if you can get like the crinkle cutter where they have like grooves and things like that, that can make it different. If you use a variety of different colors, getting something that's a little bit different color, for example, purple potatoes, or getting different kinds of, like there are actually different colored carrots that you can get. And so some children, the differences in color will be more visually appealing to them. Also, of course, different kinds of sauces can help. And also for children who have texture issues, it can be really helpful. Many children that I see with autism are extremely averse to even the smell or the sight of certain foods. Some children won't even tolerate having food on their plate. And so for some of these children, we need to work step by step. So we need to first work on them just tolerating the smell of the food, seeing the food on their plate, and we don't even ask them to put it in their mouth, but it's just on their plate, and that's all there is. And then the next step after that might be to smell the food and to touch the food, touch it with their hands. And then the next step after that is touching it to their mouth. The next step after that is actually putting it into their mouth, and maybe they spit it out. And then the next step after, the final step, would be to actually get them to put it in their mouth, chew it, and swallow it. And so for some children with autism or a lot of sensory or texture issues, we need to work up in a sequential manner that way. And working up can be helpful. And there's an excellent clinic called Sprouts Therapy that I highly recommend. They have an excellent feeding therapy program that can be very, very helpful for picky eaters. And they also do occupational therapy. If you have a child that's in behavioral therapy with autism, that could be helpful. You can ask them to help you with picky eating and help to get your child to be able to eat other kinds of food. And for any child, sometimes if they can play with their food, then playing with their food can actually be a step that could be very helpful in terms of helping them to actually eat the food eventually. So what you could do is you could have your child touching the foods. You could get maybe plastic knives or things like that to help them cut up the food. You can get those mashers that have the screw-on lid, and then they can just push down on the masher to mash up the foods. After they mash up the foods and there's a different texture, let them touch it, let them play with it, let them feel those different textures. Let them help you with some of the other kinds of things. Have them help you with the preparation of food, and that can sometimes be helpful. There was a question over here, a comment that was made by Karen. She said, "My son is a very picky eater, and he can taste and see anything different with his foods. He will throw up if he senses things he doesn't like. He is autistic and sensory. Any suggestions? He likes crunchy." So absolutely. I mean, I would really recommend looking into the feeding therapy program at Sprouts Therapy. I think that could be very, very helpful. But as I mentioned, some of the different things, because if he, like you said, if he even sees something different with his food, then that can be a threat to him. So trying to let him play with the food, getting different toys and different items. Maybe he can, use a mortar and pestle to try to grind up the foods. And you're not even asking him to put the food in his mouth, but even just trying to touch it, or see if he will eventually be able to tolerate smelling of food. But let him have fun with the food. Let him play with it. Let him get his hands dirty with the food. And that's some of the techniques that they use in the feeding therapy program. But you could start with some of those things at home. There's also an excellent site that was written by a mom of a child with autism, and she talked about some of the techniques that they needed to use to help with picky eating. So I'll put that into the post at the end, because that can be very helpful. There's some really, really helpful things that are I would say specific to picky eating and autism particularly. Let me see, and actually I'll just pop the link into over here. Yeah, so I just popped the link into the chat. That's a very helpful page from the support group TACA, or the Autism Community in Action, and so that can be very helpful. Another thing that can be helpful for all picky eaters in general, whether they have autism or not, don't let them snack throughout the day. Wait until dinner time, and then they'll be more hungry and more likely to eat what's on their plate. Also try techniques like what we call this then that. So say your child knows that they have a really favorite food that they love to eat. And so what you can do is you could say, okay, take one bite of this vegetable or whatever it is, and then you can have your favorite food. Now for some children with autism, they're not going to be able to take a bite of that food right away. So it might be something where it's just you have this food on your plate, and then you can have some of your favorite food. And then later on they touch it just with their hand, and then they have some of their favorite food the next day. And then the next day could be, okay, now you're going to put it in, let's see if you just smell it really quick and then put it away. And then you can have your favorite food. And then you keep working up to the point, and then eventually you try to have them, okay, just touch it to your lips and then put it down. And then then actually bite it and then spit it out. And then the last step, of course, would be actually biting it and eating it. Sometimes kids like to actually mash up foods too, so that can be helpful as well. But that behavioral technique of this, then that can be helpful. If you do have a child that will at least take one bite of something, then what you can do is every day you can have them take just one bite of the food that you're trying to introduce. For other children, they may be able to introduce more new foods a little quicker. So every day you could try one bite of a different kind of food every day, and then they can eat their favorite food or whatever it is. So that can be very helpful. Now for a lot of children on the spectrum, and just a lot of children in general, like crunchy foods. So what are some healthier alternatives to, say, things like potato chips? There are different kinds of chips, so taro chips, banana chips, plantain chips, carrot chips, sweet potato chips, even beet chips. So you can try some of those. See if your child will tolerate them. And what about alternatives to candy? So a stepping stone for if your child is really addicted to candy is you can get candies that are made with xylitol. So xylitol is a natural sweetener, and I'll just put the name into the chat so that you can see how it's spelled. But if you're watching this video, it's Xylitol, xylitol. So xylitol is something that most children can usually tolerate fine. There are rarely a few times where some people will get a little bit more bloating with it, but the vast majority of people are fine with xylitol. And xylitol is actually good for your teeth. It's actually put in toothpaste because it helps to prevent tooth decay. And so it's a good alternative. So you can start to get candies that are made with xylitol and use that as a stepping stone to kind of move away from regular candies. If your child really likes ice cream and if they can eat bananas, then something that you could do is you can make a banana ice cream. So you peel bananas and you freeze it, and then what you can do is you can add, you just put that all in a blender and then you just blend it up. And you can add other kinds of fruits, but if you put that in, then it makes a texture that's really similar to ice cream, and that can be a really nice ice cream replacement for some children, particularly if your child is really hooked on ice cream. Now with the banana ice cream, you do need to eat it quickly because it can kind of tend to melt, so you do need to eat it quickly, but that can be a helpful alternative. And then many parents whose children cannot tolerate cow's milk, they can use plant-based milks as an alternative. This is, I would say, very helpful for many children with autism. Many children with autism do tend to have issues with dairy products, including cow's milk, cheese, and other things. But an alternative to cow's milk can be things like soy milk, almond milk, oat milk, rice milk, hemp milk, coconut milk. I would say my favorite is probably coconut milk. There is a downside to rice milk in that rice can be high in arsenic. So I try to use caution with rice milk. I will usually try to do other alternative milks first if they can do that. So we've covered a number of things today. We've talked about nutrient deficiencies that could contribute to picky eating. We've talked about some of the problems with processed and packaged foods, and we've talked about a number of techniques that can be helpful to help children be able to eat a little bit healthier. And so just remembering that it's a stepping stone, take one step at a time. And I trust that our discussion about healthier foods for children has been useful for you. It's important to note that my patients and I are really in a partnership for health. So my protocols and guidance added to their commitment to improving their lives enables them to be empowered with their health. That means that they learn to heal their condition, how to feel more energetic, and how to be happier. Now, this has just really been a short introduction in terms of how to help your child with picky eating. Now, if you have more questions or if you want to talk with me personally, feel free to call or text our office to schedule a free phone consultation with me. There's no charge because I don't take patients without talking to them first. I always want to make sure that what I do fits their needs. You'll find all of the contact information on our Facebook page, and you can also click on the link in the post. Mahalo, and I look forward to being with you again in 2 weeks. Aloha.